Si mon cœur est français, mon cou, lui, est international. My heart is French, but my ass, that's international.
You know, there's a certain je ne sais quoi about the French. The way they capture the human condition, the sweeping romance, the sheer artistry. I always say if you want real cinema, go to France.
Hold on, Eric, are you feeling okay? Usually when we talk about French movies, you start making jokes about cigarettes and mimes and how they don't actually know how to make a movie.
That was after 1967. That's the end of cinema era. We aren't there yet. Right now, we're in the golden age, before the fall.
The end of cinema? Is cinema gonna end?
No spoilers, Erin. Now, I mean, you'll have to tune in next week for that, but yeah, totally, it's over. Anyway, let's get on to the 1840s by way of the 1940s.
I'm Erin Brown.
I'm Eric Trommater.
I'm Jennifer Trujillo.
I am Sila Blume, and this is World Cinema History.
Today, we are looking at Children of Paradise, L'Enfant du Paradis, released in 1945. When it finally made its way to the States, the marketing department had one job: to make Americans watch a 3-hour-long French film. Their solution was to label it The French Gone with the Wind. It's an epic historical piece centered on a messy 4-way love triangle around a central, enigmatic woman. But like its American counterpart, it carries the weight of its era. It's a monument in every sense, hugely influential, undeniably beautiful, but also carrying some deeply troubling stereotypes. Let's get some opening thoughts, and we'll start with Erin Brown. What are your opening thoughts on your first viewing of Children of Paradise?
It took a minute to get into it because it started out kind of slow, I thought. After that, it was like actually fun to watch. It was kind of a product of its time in a lot of ways. For instance, white guys playing Othello is kind of not okay. When Patrick Stewart played Othello, he was like the only white guy in a cast of black people, so he like reversed the races to make it not racist. I'm wondering if Baptiste was actually in love, or if he was in love with the idea of being in love. He was a strange character, but overall, I enjoyed it.
The eternal question: how do you know if you're actually in love with somebody that you've never fucked?
Where are you, my stutz dear cat of love? All over I am looking someplace for you. Where does it that you are secreting itself, you? Where is it your hiding place?
Jennifer Trujillo, your opening thoughts on Children of Paradise.
I agree with Erin. I think it was a slow start. I know you gave me a romance, but I don't know that I loved it overall. I think, there's a lot of the tragedy in the romance, right? With the misdirections of I love them, but they love someone else, and that one loves someone else.
That's a famous song from the 70s.
Oh.
Love stinks.
Stings or stinks?
You love her, and she loves him, and he loves somebody else. You just can't win. And so it goes until the day you die. This thing you call love is going to make me die. Love stinks. Love stinks. Yeah, love stinks.
I have heard that now that you say it, but that's funny. It would not have occurred to me. Yes, that with this. There was very much a difference between the first and second act of the film. It did take a while to get to know the cast of characters, and I did have some investment in sort of understanding where their story went. I don't know, oftentimes I have to really like either my villains or not. Like, I have to care about some of the characters for me to really get my want or my heart into the film. I did enjoy the understanding of watching, Garance or is that her name? Or Claire's journey and who she really was, who all these men perceived her to be. There was definitely male gaze going on in this film around her. The interesting twist with that was, she was who she was, and she wasn't, I think, to almost all of them, maybe Frederic, but otherwise I don't know that she was her authentic self with any of them. And I don't even know, I think she had some authentic self with herself, but I mean, the romance lover in me often has to care more about my villains or my primary protagonists or whatever to get hooked in, and I don't know that I was overly hooked. I struggle sometimes with watching, like, I understand the gravitas that this is considered. I mean, an amazing film. Like
voted the best French film of all time at the 2022 Cannes Film Festival. Yeah,
and many people seem to repeat that. And I don't know.
It's about 127, I think, on the latest Sight and Sound poll. So outside of France, it's when we did the episode, the John Dillman episode. Points for anyone who had that on your bingo card.
Ding, ding, ding.
I listed it in my top 10 films of all time, but I am kind of in a minority, and we are going to get to the film has kind of had a balance, if you will, of views. So you were not in a minority of people who didn't see it as, essential cinema.
I can see the whys, I guess. For me, it was the story I'm talking about. Like, I mean, I'd love to hear more. I mean, could I write 5 different English papers on this film? Like, if I had to write look at the themes of love, look at the theme of truth, look at the theme of reflections and reality versus what you see in the mirror or the illusions that are created by mirrors and light and sound, like things like that. Sure. So I get all that. I didn't love it as much as I hoped that I would based on what it said. Sometimes as we talk through things, it helps me change my opinion on a lot of that stuff. I was hoping that I would be swept away in multiple romances, and that, that was sad for me. It was interesting. I'm looking forward to our discussion around it. Usually I, especially not having seen it, I wait to go down a rabbit hole until after I've watched it, which I did have a little bit of time to hear some other people's opinions. And they had some very huge opinions of things that I'm like, yeah, I can see that. Sure. So I feel like a poo-pooer, but I don't hate it. I'm not saying I hated it. I didn't think I would be able to get through it in the beginning. As it started, I was like, oh my gosh, I have 3 hours of this. But I did pick it up and I could watch it and watched all the way through without being like, I have to eat my 3-day-old cold Brussels sprouts, which I love Brussels sprouts, but imagining me as a kid, I guess. Anyways, I am optimistic to hear what we talk about and learning more things about it. And perhaps I will rewatch it with a different perspective and learn more, or just reflecting in my own head. I will learn some more and have my opinions change on things. And I like learning the things we always learn, how it connects. I really want to know how we hook into the road to Godard, which I see some of that, but I want to hear from you about that, Eric, and everybody else. And yeah, I am optimistic to hear what we learned today as we talk. So thanks.
All will become clear. A couple of names that you'll recognize from last week. You'll recognize Maria Caceres, who was the princess in Orpheus and also played the judge in Testament of Orpheus. Our old friend Gaston Maudeau from L'Âge d'Or, and from the Lost episode that we did on La Grande Illusion is there. Marcel Perez, who we've seen in a few films. Quite a very diverse cast here. This was the largest film made in France up until 2002, when they did a version of Les Miserables that finally had a larger cast. And this was filmed during the German occupation in 1945. But on that note, we'll turn to Sila Blume, your opening thoughts on your having just finished watching Children of Paradise.
First of all, I like it very much, I would say. And to the point of starting slow, I cannot disagree. However, like many times, I have to think, when I see, or anybody sees a film or reads a book or has sex with a person for the first time, it cannot be compared to anything else. Neither negative or positive. Is just, you know nothing. It's been the first situation that you're confronted with that experience, and it's impossible to know anything about what just happened. What is the author or the director not only trying to tell me, but what is he talking about? It takes a long time to have any clue, at least for me, any clue of what was going on. And then, as I thought, I'm kind of understanding what's going on. Suddenly I get, that's the end of part 1. I found that really interesting because not knowing what this film was about, not knowing anything, and being kind of impressed by this typical photography of the situation and the conditions of a Paris that is lively, many like 100 years ago, even 200 years ago, with the decadence, the poverty, and the liveliness of Paris, including the people celebrating and including the gutter, everything. It is so amazing to suddenly being in this situation and then see this woman, and the 3 encounters she does between, I think, within 10 minutes or even less, which leads me to the term that Jennifer just used, man gaze. And I think that's a difficult terminology because back to another question that you asked before, Eric, about how to know or when to know that is love. When I combine the man gaze and how to know when you are in love, we see her jumping from one man to another, or 3 different men trying to approach her. So I would easily think, they're not really being sincere, because especially the second one, as soon as she leaves, he starts the same play with the next that he meets. To the point of man gaze, she is not sincere either. She is not showing herself to any of these people. She is, throughout the film, we notice towards the end that she has developed a deep connection or a deep need for a certain man, but she never showed it to him. I think it's a very, very complex film, and I like very much the idea to spread it out in such a way that I did not really know what is going on and why, and I think it's necessary to make it that long to be able to portray these different layers and this interesting study of what it might mean to be in love. I mean, I think in the end, love is too fragile to be about sincerity, and sex is too fragile to be in any form connected to sincerity as well. And we like to define things in a very absolute way. What is sex? What is love? What is life? But we don't know. Nobody knows. Towards the end, like in the film, towards the end, we can kind of gather all the pieces and realize at the end that she loved, whatever that means, she loved him, the pantomime. There's no bone there. It's just a reference to a word that everybody feels bombastic, but nobody really knows what love is.
To quote the famous line from Coonskin, I should have fucked her when I had the chance. But Sila, you brought up a great point about this film, because this is the closest you are going to get to the 18th century French literary tradition on film. And interestingly enough, this is not an adapted work. This isn't a big novel that was kind of forced on screen. This was originally written for the screen. Now, the characters were all based on real people. The Boulevard of Crime was a real place. We vaguely know when this takes place. We think the 1840s because the theater that it takes place in was burned down in 1872, so we know it's before that. And there are a couple of events that say that it was before the Second Revolution in 1850. It's vaguely in the 1840s, and of course and that's the high time of French literature, and this is the closest we are going to see on film of somebody being able to take that epic sweep and put it onto film. And the person who did that, we talk a lot about directors here, but in this case we're going to talk about the screenwriter, and that's a man who we talked a little bit about last week, a man by the name of Jacques Prévert. Much like last week's director, Jean Cocteau, Prévert was a poet first. Although he declared himself, I can't remember the exact French term, it's like petit poet, but a minor poet. And that's all he said he wanted to be in life. And also, like Coteau, he was originally part of the Surrealist movement until he had a falling out with André Breton. That guy again. That poetic background is why the dialogue feels so heavy with intent. It's not just talk, in my view. There's a specific archetype working here, and the words carrying the weight with the visuals doing the heavy lifting. To me, this is the best balance of literary and cinematic in one film. The fact that it takes 3 hours and 10 minutes in order to do this is simply because you cannot fit an entire novel into a traditional 90 to 110 minute film. It's just impossible. One has to give way to the other. The experience has to become either a cinematic one or a literary one. And in film, normally if you allow a film to become too literary, it will fail on cinematic grounds. This is the one film I think succeeds on both. What is truly wild is when this was filmed. This French monument was made during the Nazi occupation of France. They were dealing with food shortages, electricity being cut off, and the Gestapo literally lurking. They had to hide their Jewish collaborators, like the production designer Alexandre Trono and composer Joseph Kozma, who had to work in secret and have their names changed to a fill-in made-up one in the credits. There's a story that they even delayed production on purpose so the film wouldn't be released until after the liberation. But in many ways, it was an act of cinematic resistance wrapped as a period piece filmed right under the Nazis' noses. This is a historical film. Does knowing the history of its making in any way affect what you guys saw on screen?
I think it's definitely impressive that they could accomplish such a big, epic film like this under those conditions. And also that you didn't get any sense of the war still going on while you're watching it. It didn't feel like there were constraints. It felt like a major studio, like a Hollywood studio, made a movie, like how Gone with the Wind didn't look like anything was going on. It was 1939 when it came out, but, bad things were happening in the world, obviously. It just felt like a big epic that was not touched by the war in any way. And so that makes it pretty impressive, I think, that they were able to do that.
No, and the whole atmosphere actually speaks of that time, the liveliness of the streets. Once we see the exchange of the mime with Claire, with the flower after that little incident, and we start going into the behind the scenes in the theater, everything you see for most of the film is very troublesome, a lot of things going on. So in sort of matches what was actually going on in real life.
What are some of the things you thought that you watched that matched up with real life? Just a few, if you could.
I did not mean that it matches with life in terms of the topic, but in terms of the tension, in terms of the busyness of everything that was going on. When we think of 1945, when there has to be some type of tension, especially when we know after the fact that it was coming to an end. So this everything was so vivid in the all the actors, all the people that this guy is going through, the incredible amount of people in the streets, and the events that are one next to the other, and one is trying to impress the other. There is so much going on that for me, that overabundance of things going on in life in that period in the film matches in terms of the intensity in real life, that it was war.
I agree with Erin, like the impressiveness that they pulled this off despite the intensity of what was happening in the world and the chaos and the practical impacts those chaos would have as far as electricity, food, risk of life. I don't know why I put that lower on the list. That should have been the top of the list. That there were life and death circumstances happening for pivotal players, key people working on this film, and yet, the show must go on. Like they wanted to tell this story and they did it. You had mentioned that in watching, like keep in mind that was happening when you watched it. And I mean, I think I was trying to look at characters that might make me feel things about parts of war and a world at war. So the chaos that came through, sure. Jericho moving in and out. And I know you want to talk about that later at some point, but that character moving through. And even the nuances of like what's happening with the women around Baptiste and like their movements in how they behaved or acted, or the two gentlemen that were thieves and the way that messaging, like sort of espionage sort of feel about some of the stuff came through. I mean, out of the context of this, if someone didn't know any of that, it would look like elements of drama. I mean, this film had the semblance of a romance and soap opera, like high drama going through. Which, I mean, I don't mean to I feel like I may have overly poo-pooed at the beginning in that sense, but, you know, it pulled that off in what it was. And I wanted to go back to what Sila said on the pacing. If they had introduced this giant, it's an ensemble type cast, right? Cast of characters. If it had gone very fast, faster than it was, it would have been hard to absorb who's who and where are they coming from. So,
well, and hard to care about what happens to them.
Yeah, it would have gone too fast. For sure.
And don't forget, even though we're experiencing a very phenomenal production for the cinema, the topic is actually theater. So it's a very, very much slower, much detailed way of doing everything.
The dialogue is not theatrical. The dialogue is very, very literary.
Correct. Yeah.
And so it's combining three elements. And I think if we call this a love triangle, because there's one member of this kind of square that isn't actually in love with anybody, if we call this a love triangle, you can see how you have the theater versus the literary world versus the cinematic world all represented in each character. And I think that's something that Prévert is doing on purpose to talk about the three aspects of his own life.
I think that's one of the bigger messages of the film. It makes me think of Lily Tomlin in her one-woman show did this whole piece, which maybe you saw it or didn't, where she had a can of soup, Candle soup, and then Andy Warhol's painting of a can of soup, and would go soup, art, soup, art. Like what is art? What is real life? Is real life art? This film really examined those questions of, like I said earlier, reality and not, and where is art, what's art and what's real life. And they did make real life art in this film, for sure.
Now, I do sometimes worry that the subtitles kind of breeze over just how great the dialogue is in this film, because every line is just a line of poetry. And I will give an example. One of the funnier jokes in this film, and it's one that was actually used for the Watchmen comic books, and it was in the Watchmen movie. But when Baptiste is feeling depressed and he goes to the doctor, and the doctor tells him, oh, well, you're just overworked. You just need to see something to cheer you up. I recommend you go see that new clown, Baptiste. And Baptiste says, well, I am that clown, Baptiste. And it doesn't come through in the subtitles, because if you're just sitting there reading it, it just sounds like he says, I went to the doctor and he told me I should go see the clown Baptiste, and it's over, and you don't really feel the impact of how rich, literary, and poetic the dialogue is.
There are lots of zinger quotes, for sure. I wrote down a couple, like the time has nothing to do with happiness. I think there was, I think I'm going to quote it right, but the whole, not only are you wealthy or rich, but you want to be loved as if you were poor. I don't know. There's lots of good ones, for sure.
My personal favorite, and one I actually used in real life when I was in a love triangle, nothing like this one, was when Natalie turns to Garance and says, you cannot love Baptiste. There's only so much love in the world, and all of the love for Baptiste in the world I have for him.
Yeah, that was a good one. That's a good moment, for sure.
It didn't work for me, by the way.
Holding all the love didn't make sure that person loved you back? Is that what you mean?
No, right? Yeah, well, you live, you learn, you grow old.
You live, you learn.
Yeah, it turns out women actually want autonomy and to be respected as human beings, and hey,
you don't want to be of Eric Trommater.
Some people have to learn shit the hard way.
I haven't learned that lesson yet, Eric. So there we go.
Well, and that's the other thing at the center of this film that's very, very literary, which is, of course, Baptiste cannot consume Garance the way Garance has consumed him, so it becomes well, if I can't have all of you, I can't have any of you. It seems so old-fashioned in today. You're like, monogamy, am I right? It does make him kind of a tragic comic figure throughout this. And when they finally consummate the relationship at the end, he has to give up believing that somehow or another he will be loved the way that he loves her. Natalie, in that same scene when she discovers the two of them, basically says that she has long ago given up on getting Baptiste to love her the way that she loves him. All she wants is to have at least a piece of his heart, enough of his heart to come home to every night. And I thought that was a very deep, very sophisticated, very French way to look at that situation.
There's a lot of weird maturity going on coming from the Duke.
The Count.
The Count, correct. They all have a kind of purity. And they also have a certain type of purity when they exchange what they have with the other. For example, the way the Count and Claire reached a point where she refers to him as a friend. Yeah.
She could have called him mon cher, which would be my dear one, but she was saying mon ami, which is my friend, and that sounded like she was making it very clear that that's all he was to her.
Yoo-hoo, rabbit! Sortez-vous, wherever you... Ah...
Yes, and even if you would have said mon chéri or my dear one, it is clearly showing a distance. And what I mean with the distance, which is it's a very interesting form of giving space to the love I feel for you, but respecting the fact that you are unwilling or unable to return it. They all seem to reach that agreement. Even Claire with the famous actor, he also seems to accept that. The young girl seems to accept that, and even the Count seems to accept that. So they have all their relationships on very different levels, and nobody is really getting what one wants, but is accepting that what they have is special, but it cannot be what the other one wants. It's a very weird 5 layers of different relationships going on. But to me, they're all kind of pure in a way.
I feel like each one of them wanted a different thing from her, and I don't know that any of them actually loved her. The Count just wanted to own her. He just wanted a pretty thing on his arm. The criminal, I think he wanted a connection, like somebody that he could use to do the things that he couldn't do himself. The actor just wanted some fun. And Baptiste, I think, just wanted the idea of love without seeing who she really was. And I think she knew that the whole way through, because she talked about early on that, you have to grow up pretty quickly where she was born. So I think she knew what everybody wanted, and that's why she was so guarded all the time. And finally, I think with Baptiste, she finally decided, this one at least, it's more about love than being used. I mean, it's possible they meant for that to be the actual love of the film, but I don't think they were in love at all. I think they just thought they were.
I agree with that, but at the same time, I feel that they were all given only what they were able to. The Count, I would not disagree that he wanted position. That's how he grew up, knowing this type of system that I can possess people and they work for me, or I can love them, but they're always under him. But at the same time, that is all what he knows. So he's not really being unfair to her. That's the way he knows life. The mime is in the same situation. He loves her in a very weird way, but that's all he can do. That's all. He has no connection, which is a very typical concept about what a clown is. They are so disconnected from everything, and suddenly one touches them and they lose themselves because they don't know, they have never experienced that from the rest of the world. So he fell in love with her on that level, and he can only give her what he is as a disturbed soul, which is the clown. I find that none of them are being really realistic. They're just given what they could in their position, but they know nothing more than that.
Yep, I agree. I think we're both saying something very similar. They're definitely giving what they can, and that's all they can do.
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned before that love has nothing to do with sincerity, because in the best case, you're being yourself, which I cannot say is necessarily sincerity. You're just being who you are. That's all you know.
A few years ago, I rewatched this film with a psychoanalyst who I was dating, but she said basically all of these people's borders, I don't think that was the word she used, are all over the place. None of these people have established any reason for them to have autonomy, which, to me sounds like psychobabble, but when you guys are talking, she makes some sense. When the Count comes in and says, "My heart is yours, everything I own is yours," immediately to a woman that he's seen on stage and is meeting for the first time, where is that relationship to go? When Baptiste starts insisting, "I love you with all my heart, but we can only be together if you love me as I love you," where is that relationship to go? Erin, you'll have to help me with how they say these things in therapy, but these people don't have any borders around themselves, so they aren't going to have any agency in these relationships. The only person who actually has any relationship agency in this is the actor, and that is because of the old psychological speak that he who cares less, she who cares less in a relationship seems to have the most control of it.
Yeah, that sounds kind of like a version of codependency. You need the person to be this thing in order for the relationship to work for you. What I've learned is from being in therapy and not from actually going to school for it, but I've been in therapy for a very long time. They have an idea of what they want, and they're not seeing the whole picture.
And isn't that Garance's whole character? She's a muse. She's a blank slate on which they can put anything, and she can be whatever she wants to any of them.
Because she's disturbed, and they are all disturbed in some way or another. They're all disturbed, which is basically what you just finished saying. They all have a very weird world for themselves, and as a result, nothing of somewhat humane balance can happen between any two of them, because they're all, I would call them all, they're all disturbed. The young woman who loves him, she's not realistic. Neither is the Count. Nobody's realistic. And Claire is really, really, I don't think we hear so much about that, only in symbolic towards the middle of the end. But she must have had a very, very bad childhood or experience, and I think she talks about her mother and the father left him. For her to be so distant to everybody who wants to get close to her. From the beginning of the film, she is also very distant to everything. She what do you call that? Coquette. She flirts. She doesn't reject the flirting 100%, but she is always showing how smart she is and how on top of everything she is, so that nothing gets to her. And that is a really clear form of being disturbed.
I think she genuinely loves Baptiste, and I think she genuinely loves Baptiste because she recognizes him as a great artist, and I think she fell in love with him during the pantomime when he's pantomiming out what happened with the watch and Lacenaire stealing the watch and her getting blamed. And it is the art of his pantomime that she falls in love with. And when Baptiste, when he's not in his mime costume, comes up and asks her to dance, that's when the coldness begins, because she's actually seeing the person behind the artist for a moment. And then when she returns to see him in makeup, falls in love with him again, and that is why they have that night where they're able to finally consummate their passion. But I do believe that she genuinely is in love with Baptiste, and she's not lying about it, that she has spent all those years in Scotland thinking of him, and that he is the other man in her life. I thought she was a prostitute. I thought her role was as a prostitute. And it's only been over the years and rewatching it and getting into her character and seeing this as a film about her and a love triangle around her that I realized that she's not. It genuinely is a tragic love story of two people who love each other that cannot be together.
But if she fell in love with Baptiste when he was in makeup, is she really in love with him, or is she in love with the idea of him, just like he's in love with the idea of her? I mean, that could turn into actual love down the road, but I don't know if it really is at the point where the film ends.
If somebody falls in love with me because of my podcast, are they in love with me or are they in love with my podcast? But my podcast is my creation, and so they are falling in love with the person who created it, so they are falling in love with me. That's my circular logic right there.
The idea of something is not the person, and so you can build up all kinds of ideas of what a person is like just from watching them perform or, listening to their podcast or whatever. It doesn't mean you know them. That's what parasocial relationships with celebrities are all about. People will fixate on a celebrity and decide they're a certain way, but they don't know this person. They're not friends. They don't know the person at all. They just think they do, and they wish they did, and they wish they were closer to that person than they ever actually could be. I still think this is something that could have developed into something, except she left and he went on with his life and got married to someone who saw him the same way that he's seeing Garance. And he almost threw that all away for something that may not really even work out. I feel bad for Natalie, but also she's fucked up in the head as well.
Could be said that the film is about the illusion of love. Not because none of them knows what love is, but because they all are banking or hoping or investing in what they think is love without considering what the other person understands as love. Claire loves Baptiste, but I cannot speak about her falling in love with him, because the falling in love for me is a certain moment, which for me it never did happen, because it was a accumulation of her memories and her situations where she comes at some point to the conclusion, I love this guy. And the moment where they were the closest and the most fruitful moment for them was when he offers to accompany her. Actually, it's the first time they really meet after they danced. I see in her face and her comments that she is just really troubled by the fact that this guy is wonderful, but he's like a little kid. He lives in a dream world. So it is not possible for her to love him, not because she doesn't have love for him, but because she sees in this guy, besides being someone that she appreciates, he is, he's like a silly human. I think that accumulates to some point where she knows that she loves him. But another thing that I think is important is to recognize, that's just my opinion, to recognize the big, huge difference between loving someone or being in love with someone and the romanticism of a couple. And one of the best examples of what I'm trying to say is these two. I don't think they could ever be really romantic because they love, and actually the same thing with Baptiste and Natalie. Her love is very intense, but I don't think it's necessarily a romantic love. It's just a very spiritual, a connection between two souls that has little to do with the sensuality of having sex with another person.
Moving on, we were talking about the characters. Let's talk a bit about the cast that played them, because the war didn't just affect the crew, it tore the cast apart. They had originally cast a collaborator named Robert Le Baron, who played the role of Jericho. He was close friends with a writer named Saline, and the two of them had published several anti-Semitic articles, and he was known to be a very pro the Vichy government, and when the Allies moved in, he realized he probably was going to be hung, so he made the fastest route to Germany in the middle of production. So to save the film, they brought in Pierre Renoir. Pierre is the brother of the legendary director Jean Renoir, and of course both of them were the sons of the great Impressionist painter Pierre-Auguste Renoir, and he had to step into a production that was essentially a crime scene and reshoot all of Le Garance scenes to keep the film alive. So every scene that you see Jericho in was actually reshot. But we had another collaborator in their midst, and that was the teaser from last week regarding our lead, Arletty. We quoted her famous line, "My heart belongs to France, but my ass is international." Did I get that right, Erin?
Si mon cœur est français, mon cœur, lui, est international.
The French resistance didn't find it nearly as funny as she did. While she was filming this epic of French national pride, she was having a very public affair with a Luftwaffe officer. Shortly after liberation, she was arrested for what was called horizontal collaboration and spent time in prison. She was one of the lucky ones who did not have her head shaved, but she actually missed the premiere of this film because she was still under house arrest. If you look at the actual accusations, they do not claim that she was just having an affair with the Luftwaffe officer. They accuse her of prostituting herself for better food and better accommodations while the rest of Paris was starving. Despite being a film that was made by people resisting the Nazis, the character of Jericho remains a textbook anti-Semitic caricature. While it's never said aloud that he is Jewish, he is obviously meant to represent the 1840s Jewish hustler. It's a jarring contradiction. You have a film that symbolizes French survival, yet at its center is a trope that aligns with the very propaganda that had just finished tearing Europe apart.
I definitely got a Fagin vibe off of Jericho. That's the person that he reminded me of most, the character, and Fagin, yeah.
Yeah, and it was a stereotype in 18th century literature, the Jewish clothes seller, the pawnbroker. The other character that we didn't talk about, somebody that I don't think anyone would mention as their favorite, the Lacenaire, the killer poet, so to speak. The man of letters who carries a knife and uses it, the intellectual monster, the scrivener, and the thief. He wasn't just a character invented for the screen. He was based on the real-life Pierre-François Lacenaire, a 19th century poet-assassin. The real Lacenaire was a celebrity criminal who turned his trial into a literary salon. He was so influential that Dostoevsky actually translated the accounts of his trial. If you've ever read Crime and Punishment, Lacenaire is the literal blueprint for Raskolnikov, that whole superior man philosophy that started with the man who inspired this character. But in this film, he's queer-quoted, and I'm not just talking about the curls on his hair. The subtext in this film is hard to ignore. Given that Marcel Carné, the director, was living an open, secret life as a queer man, Lacenaire is heavily coded, from his meticulous dandyism to his domestic life with his henchman Avril. There are several scenes that illustrate this, but I'm going to give you my favorite, that telling detail in the cafe where Lacenaire, after performing an attempted murder robbery, orders a brandy, and his henchman Avril orders a hot chocolate. It's such a specific, intimate domesticity between the two men. They aren't just partners in crime, they are a unit existing entirely outside the tradition of the French family. Lacenaire is the ultimate outsider. He'd rather meet his destiny at the guillotine than play a role he doesn't believe in.
I did find humor in the slow unveiling of his little dagger and then back. I don't know. I was amused by that.
When he killed the Count, that was like the most anticlimactic murder I've ever seen. It just kind of happened quietly off screen.
Well, no. You're watching it through Avril's eyes. You're hearing it, but you're watching Avril watch and so you're seeing everything in Avril's face. I thought that, as opposed to being anticlimactic, it was dramatically beautiful.
I mean, is he villainized, or is he a villainized queer? So he's
Absolutely.
Another negative stereotype that came through.
That was, I didn't make that point very clear, did I? Yeah, no,
No,
that's
I
what
just
I'm
wanted to make
saying.
sure.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, I just ding, 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 just got
But the way that they do,
like, people love the queers.
but the way that Carné does it, because I don't think it's in Jacques Prévert's screenplay except for the hot chocolate scene. The way that he does it is by creating a rather tender relationship between him and Avril. And that is, I think, the queer director Carné kind of projecting his own experience into not just the performances, but how he stages them. And the way that relationship works and the kind of almost nagging quality the two of them have. They look like an old married couple.
They have that. And they move through the world with their partners in crime and partners in everything. Interesting to tie it into the director, because I would have needed help with that. So, thanks.
Unlike Godard, I'm a huge Marcel Carné fan. And as a matter of fact, the very first French film I ever saw was his Le Jour sans Lèvres, which was made before Citizen Kane, and I saw it before Citizen Kane. I honestly think I never would have understood Citizen Kane if I hadn't seen the Carné Prévert film first because of its flashback structure. I think Carné is probably the most underrated director, just how transformative his form of cinema is. What is Prévert trying to tell us in this film? The man who, before he was writing Monument, was himself a hitman in a way. In 1930, when he was breaking from the Surrealist movement, something we mentioned briefly last week, signed on a manifesto called Un Cadavre, otherwise known as a corpse, one of many future references to corpse that we're going to have. I don't know why the French love calling things corpses. They just do. The corpse was André Breton, the Pope of Surrealism. Breton was a total aesthetic dictator. He'd hold liberal trials for his friends to kick them out if their personal lives didn't match his rigid and often homophobic rules for what a revolutionary should be. The manifesto featured a famous photo of Breton wearing a crown of thorns, mocking his self-appointed martyrdom. Prévert's takedown was brutal. He called him a faker and a surrealist policeman. This is where the archetypes of the film come from. When you see Lacenaire or Garance refusing to be owned or categorized by the world around him, to me, that is Prévert's 1930 rebellion talking. He spent his career writing for the street and in the boulevard of crime because he'd already survived the upper-class church of surrealism.
I think you could throw out a handful of topics and write. We could sit here and have critical discussions on each one. You could write a paper on each one. You could write a paper on the use of flowers through this film. You know what I mean? There's things like that. The other thing for me, which is not the symbolism you're talking about, and I don't know if we're going to talk about it, just being blown away by the sets and that this was a studio on set films. Like that, the Boulevard, that's a set, right? I mean,
The largest set in French history. There are various estimates, but it was probably about a quarter of a mile long. But
yeah.
Give you something more impressive about how it was built. In order to create perspective, I'm not going to get too much into my lens thing, but this was shot with 30 to 50 millimeter lenses instead of wide angles. But to give you a wide angle perspective, the sets are built gradually smaller so that the houses at the end of the shot that you can barely see were actually only about 2 feet tall, and the doors on them were only about 5 inches off the ground.
I mean, you could see that in the angle where they're standing, and lots of the shots of it descends from high left to low right, or 11 to down to like 5 on the clock. I agree. And it was very cleverly done. Like the theaters themselves, were those sets also?
Yes, all of it. Every single, this was shot on backlots and sets. There is not a single shot of this film that was done on location. Most of the shadows in the corners of this were painted so that they would be pitch black.
To give it depth.
To give it depth, exactly. So that the flats didn't look flat.
And you're telling me I could have seen the bricks. Huh.
You could have
I'll have
seen
to
the
look
bricks.
at it again.
Unfortunately, in the restoration, you can see the bricks because the automatic digital scrubbing took the shadows out that were covering all of that, and you can actually see the seams and the corners in the restoration. They did the best they could with a molding print. So later on, this film came under a huge amount of criticism from the exact subject of this entire series that we've been doing this entire year, Jean-Luc Godard and the Cahiers du Cinéma crowd. They had a very specific name for this kind of film. They called it a beautiful corpse. There the French are with that word again. They meant it was technically perfect but fundamentally dead inside because it was trapped in a studio. There was a personal edge to this too. Last week we talked about Cocteau, who was an out and proud celebrity. Marcel Carné, who was much more private, but his sexuality was an open secret in the industry. The New Wave critics, who were mostly straight and obsessed with virile street filmmaking, often used coded homophobic language to attack Carné's style as precious or unnatural. But here's the kicker. Years after he had become a legend himself, their most famous director, Francois Truffaut, admitted that he would trade all 23 of the films that he had made if he could have just directed Children of Paradise. To Godard and the rest of them, Children of Paradise was the film they were actually reacting against when they created films like Breathless and next week's Weekend.
Well, this is 80 years ago, so we are not in that vacuum, and even less in the vacuum of what they were trying to portray.
The French critics of the time, and then especially later, who turned on Prévert more than Carné, were reacting to his abandonment of the French Communist Party after the invasion of Hungary in 1956. And so they looked on Prévert as a turncoat. It just is too big a coincidence that all of a sudden, 1957, the year that Prévert came out and said, and I quote, "Okay, they're shit." Suddenly, he's kitsch, and everything that he ever did is anti-cinema and anti-poetry. I'm talking up until 1967 with Godard. His criticism of it seems to be enlightened by that. After that, when he joined the Maoist cell, most of what Godard said about anything was kind of just commie groupthink garbage. And so I don't take any of that, the post-1967 serious. But the pre-1967, there's a vitriol against this film and Carné and Prévert in particular that is far too strong for, well, we want to go make movies out on location and don't want to have to get stuck shooting on a studio. To me, that's what it comes down to, was Prévert's refusing to defend Stalinism and his turning his back on the French Communist Party.
I find that very interesting and very important, that the clear involvement of the people, the regular, really simplest people in town, in Paris, how the people, the folk, were involved every day with what we call theater life and intellect. Well, I wouldn't say intellectual, but it's a world that we don't know today. I don't know, I mean, at least the places I have visited in my life, in New York, even though we have what we call Broadway theaters, which are a very, very far cry from, high-end Shakespeare type of things, it's still not for the people.
You didn't like The Lion King?
We saw another movie which showed that too. In this film, you see so clearly that, be it circus or theater or Shakespeare, the people, the real normal people, are almost every day in contact with that. They're able to react to it. They're able to glorify it, to reject it. But I found that very, very significant. in this film to put the importance of theater and the cultural life one-to-one with the people.
And isn't that what socialism is all about, as opposed to excusing every goddamn thing that Stalin ever did? Quite honestly, isn't Prévert actually the one putting on screen true socialist idealism, as opposed to these brainwashed French New Wave kids who are just taking their marching orders from the French Communist Party?
I remember a good friend. We dated a little while in Europe, and when we spoke about art, all she could say was that she likes Van Gogh. That was a little bit of a sign of poverty, but in this film, you see that they're involved. They don't know just one name, or they're involved with it.
And the title of the film, Children of Paradise, the paradise was the upper rafters where the working class and lower class people sat in the theater, which it'd be interesting to see how many people picked that up from the subtitle version that we saw, where they use the British phrase gods as opposed to paradise, even though every character is clearly saying paradis when the subtitle says God in this film. That was where the title of the film came from.
I have an idea about it, but I was curious what you have thought about how this title is used in reference to what's going on in the film. Children and Paradise.
Prévert's literal meaning is the actors on the stage are the children of paradise because they are playing to the upper rows. He manifests this in several scenes, but the most comic of them being when the upper class people sitting in the front rows in the box seat, and one of them turns around because they're making too much noise and says, "Be quiet, we can't hear the mime."
I found that kind of funny. I found it a little bit overdone with that joke.
But these were the people, yeah. But the Children of Paradise, the idea is that the Paradise section, the God section, what they call in Britain, the upper rows, the furthest seats from the stage, were filled by the people who couldn't afford to go to the real theaters in Paris. These were the French version of the Penny Dreadfuls, and the Boulevard of Crime was called that because so many of the plays that were performed there were criminal melodramas. When the phrase Children of Paradise is being used, that is what it means literally from the French. But since this movie's come out, it's come to mean so many different things that have absolutely nothing to do with that. And I think a lot of that has to do with that mis-subtitling, where they're not using the word paradise, they're using the word gods to refer to those upper balcony seats.
I had my own interpretation of that for my way of seeing the film. And that is that paradise, I would very clearly put in context with what love is. And children, I connect with, immaturity. You're not there yet. You're not developed yet, and that is the typical situation of most of the characters in the main scenes, where they're in the paradise of love, but they really don't know what to do with it. They don't know what to do with it.
Recently, the film underwent a massive 4K restoration, but restoration might be a generous word. They tried to clean it up. The digital process actually scrubbed away the blacks and whites to the point where the contrast is gone. By removing the film grain, they made the whole thing look fuzzy. It's a bizarre situation where a high-resolution 4K scan actually looks more out of focus than an old low-res VHS version like the one I owned when I was growing up. This is a film that actually looked better on VHS than it did on digital. I actually had a copy where I recorded this off of, I think it was Turner Classic Movies, on a video, a DVD recorder, and I watched it on my HD TV in 2014, and because the analog dots created grain to still look sharp and in focus even in HD. So to me, if they had just transferred the original version to digital, this would have looked a lot better, because by removing the grain, they've also removed all of the resolution and texture and the clarity of the image. The other thing that kind of bothers me about this restoration is the kind of waxiness of it. And I'm not just talking about the fact that, okay, so he painted the shadows, so and the automatic cleaning that took the grain out was because they had to do that to get the scratches off, because I understand the negative was in bad shape and they were in a hurry because mold was actually eating at the negative. But if there is a better version of a film that looks better, why not release that one? Even if your expensive restoration cost however much it cost to restore this, if it failed, why are we stuck with this version? The gold version of this is the 2002 Criterion DVD release. It's not Blu-ray, it's not high resolution, but because the digital scanning from the analog left the digital dots that make up an analog signal, it still looks like it has film grain, so it still has definition, and it looks 100 times sharper. Plus, the blacks are still incredibly black and the whites are incredibly white, and so you get the contrast. I'll get off my soapbox now.
Do you think that the depth of the sets got flattened through the restoration? Like the street?
Because the film grain sharpens everything in the foreground. Now everything is dull because the film grain isn't there. You don't have whether it's film grain or old analog TV, everything was made up of little dots, and each one of those dots gives your eye the perception of sharpness. When you take all of that away, right, then everything is just kind of one big blur, and so those incredibly elaborate sets look just like a mush in this version. Some of the shadows are ridiculously bleeded out to the point where you can actually see the brick wall behind the flats that they were using, that they had covered with black paint, because what they've basically done by deleting the dark shadow effect was delete the paint, and so what you're seeing is the actual pattern of the bricks behind it on what's supposed to be a Roman-looking column. I mean, I don't understand how this got released looking like this. Yes, it's a film that I'm passionate about. So yes, I am glad that it is in a format that people will be able to watch it 100 years from now. Whereas because it was on silver nitrate film, it wasn't going to be if they didn't transfer it to digital. But when they did the restoration to VHS, and then when they did it to Laserdisc, they had a perfectly good copy of this film that worked on that technology. And I don't understand why you have to take away what makes this film great in so many ways to upgrade it to the new technology, quite honestly. Aren't we as an audience mature enough to say that grain was a part of what of what the working of a film is? Why do you have to scrub away every single bit of grain in a film just to get rid of a few scratches? I understand if they had just released it by taking the negative and transferring it to digital, the scratches would have been too much. You had to clean up some of those scratches. But again, why not go back to the video archive from analog and just transfer that version to digital? I did it, and it looked great on HD TV.
Can you think of a reason why they did do it this way? I mean, meaning, why didn't they do what you wanted it to do?
Modern audiences look at grain as bad. And ever since 2012, they look at it, they look at, oh, that's old and that's grainy. And so by cleaning up the grain, a modern audience can watch it on their HD TV, and they're not going to pick out the grain. And I'm not a grain fetishist. I know that if Marcel Carné had his choice, he would have shot this on stock that would have not shown a bit of grain whatsoever. Otherwise, he would have shot it on a faster film. But what I am saying is that is like saying I'm not going to look at a painting that wasn't painted before enamels were invented because oil paint was a poor substitute or something like that. It's a ridiculous way of marketing a film. I made this film from 1945 look more modern, which is what they did by scrubbing away the grain.
I mean, I agree with the ridiculous of that, and they could have possibly put a warning at the beginning of the film or an explanation as you watch this film, and here's why. That might be.
Yours didn't have that warning. We did our best. We did our best.
You gave it to me.
Yes, there was a warning at the front, but
you gave me a warning up front.
We did our best, but yeah. But and the shadows part that's inescapable to me. I think, quite honestly, that was just a fuck up. They fucked up taking the shadows out of a film. Do that to Citizen Kane. Do that to Stagecoach. Do that to How Green Was My Valley in color. And see who's going to say, "Oh, great, thank you for restoring that for us."
Remember when they colorized everything? I mean, this sounds like the same thing. It's like, hey, modern audiences want this, so we're going to do this to sell copies of it. Whether they're right or not, it's all about money.
Now, I want to make clear, if they hadn't have done this, the negative wasn't going to survive. It actually literally had mold eating on it.
There's your answer.
And I'm sure it was in a hurry, okay? But when the technology of 2012, because using an automatic cleaner to clean it, mistakes grain and shadows for dirt, which is the only explanation for how waxy this copy looked. Okay, you know what? I'm going to end this because I'm going to get angry. And I don't want to be angry because I love this movie. This is a movie about love.
Audiences are watching from small cell phones to, projected home theaters to mega screens, right? So, I mean, I think it's unfortunate.
What you saw acceptable?
I don't have a huge screen that I watch on. I'm watching on a 16-inch MacBook Pro.
The first
which
time
does
I
pretty
saw
well.
this film was on a 21-inch tube television. So that part doesn't matter.
I had a haze and a lacking of shadows. I could see that. I didn't see the bricks, but I didn't dial in. So I'm going to try to look at some of that after.
Well, that may be something where if you've seen the film a few times, it sticks out to you because you know how it's supposed to look.
And I might have seen it. I feel like I might have seen that if it was bigger. I'm sure this film isn't the only victim to that, but better than having lost it at all. That it's preserved in a way, and there are other elements of the film that are worthwhile that people will still get to see it, as you said, next year and 100 years from now. There's that part that's a benefit.
I'd never seen it before, and I was busy reading the subtitles, so I really didn't notice anything weird. Anything that I did notice, I was like, well, it's an old movie. So, I don't know. Maybe other audiences are more like me, and they're just like, I'm reading the subtitles.
It's like that scene in Sideways where Paul Giamatti is like criticizing the wine about saying, oh, they left some stems and stir to try and give it depth, and the other guy, tastes good to me. That's what matters in the end, isn't it?
What made you think that Garance was the prostitute?
Oh, I saw that too.
Because
I have to admit.
She was a model when she's being interviewed by the police, and she's trying to give these vague descriptions. And in American films, that's how you coded this is a prostitute without saying this is a prostitute. So I mentally had transferred that. No, but it was a mistake. I was wrong. Well, I guess there was more to it than that because I was reading way too deep into it. We discussed Man Ray last week, and when she says she was a model for a particular early daguerreotype photographer and then says something about him playing the violins, I was thinking of, remember those Man Ray photos where he would paint women's backs, nude backs, like a violin? And for some reason, I had associated
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I had, in my, 14-year-old brain, had just kind of blurred all of that together into one and came up with prostitute.
I thought you got it some from her overall perspective because certainly of a woman of the era, right? There's not this, she has to be a virgin for one person in purity. Like, she wants to have sex or physical contact, and she has her own.
Yeah, no, not at 14. I
agency.
Absolutely didn't have that depth of knowledge about women.
But you had an awareness of Man Ray?
Yeah.
At 14.
Oh,
So,
I was
Eric, were you a
I
weird
was the
kid
kid
or
who
what?
was collecting. If Cocteau is in your collection, Man Ray is in your collection. Just think about that.
I'm thinking my awareness of Man Ray might have been 16, 15, but I guess that's not far off.
I thought it was a perfectly fine film. I don't think I would put it as one of my favorites. I don't know that it was quite as deep as it's coming across right now, but that just might be me, so I don't know.
As I said, I enjoyed the film very much. I think there's a lot to the film, not necessarily because it might be an intellectual film or a profound film, but because it touches on a few things that for me are very layered. So I think a lot of it has to do with how the individual perceives the film, how it touches that individual.
I was going to reflect out there, just on the same sort of thing. Like, I really appreciate the critical dialogue and the discussion that people have. And I hope that there are people listening that have thoughts, opinions, questions about this film, its story, its characters, the way it was remastered, and would throw things out there in the dialogue to broaden that discussion. I mean, we know there's people listening, and maybe you turn and talk to people in your immediate circle in your life. You go over lunch and say, did you listen to the podcast? Have you seen this film? It'd be fun to hear some of those thoughts reflected in places where you can comment, in the Patreon or on YouTube, or places where you can put things out there. I just think it would be interesting and fun to hear some good other opinions from other people that are listening. That's really where my final thoughts are on all of the things that we watch. I mean, I do that in my world. I certainly tell people things I've watched, and there's people around me that are watching some of the films, and they do listen to the podcast, and then, they have things they want to say. But I hope people put it into a space on a broader spectrum so that more people in the community or out there can talk about it. And the fact that this films will be available in 100 years, and probably, maybe this podcast will be available in 100 years and someone could be talking about it, that would be kind of rad.
Where can people find you on the Gilbert Baker Film Festival on the internet, Jennifer?
Gilbert Baker Film Festival.lgbt, and on Gilbert Baker Film Fest on Instagram. And both on our website and on Instagram, there's a link tree there, and you can connect to all things Gilbert Baker, follow along with our social media, and get geared up for the festival coming in June, July, August, and into September. And then I can be found there as well. So reach out there and reach out in our comments in places, please. Thanks. Look forward to people connecting.
And Sila Blume, where can people find your goings on online?
That would be silablume.life.
Erin Brown, where can people find you online, and where can they find our podcast?
I'm on Blue Sky at Toad Puppy, and I'm on YouTube at Pizza Horse Productions. And you can find the podcast at ko-fi.com/world cinema history. We've got all of our episodes up on there, and you can join in the conversation, leave a comment, leave a tip, which can help improve the podcast, like get us better sound equipment, all that stuff, and keep the podcast ad-free.
And you can find me at Twitter, or the artist formerly known as Twitter, at ETROMMATER. Also, check out our Facebook group, World Cinema History Podcast, on Facebook. Join us next week as we reach the end of our Road to Godard series. We're covering 1967's Weekend. It's a movie that ends with the literal title card, End of Cinema. We're going from the heights of the French studio system to the total cinematic collapse. We're also going to connect the dots on how all the films that we've covered this year so far fit in to the Road to Godard. See you then, and thank you for listening to World Cinema History.